welcome you here this evening, and I'm delighted to be able to say that we could publish The Limits of Democratic Governance in South Africa in a paperback edition for the local market. We have here Professor Picard, Louis Picard, who is one of the co-authors. The second is Thomas Mokale of Wits. And we have Professor Robert Cameron of the Department of Political Studies at UCT. Professor Picard is a professor in the Graduate School of Public and International Affairs and director of the Ford Institute for Human Security at the University of Pittsburgh. Robert Cameron is professor of public administration in the Department of Political Studies at UCT. He convenes a public policy and administration graduate program there, and his research interests are comparative local government politics and administration, public sector reform, and public administration.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for the very nice introduction. I think I've been working a long time on some of these things, and of course that does gain something, at least gains perhaps a little bit of perspective, and gives one time to think about things. But this is a project that I thought I would work on for a couple of years. I started in 1984. It was the first time I started thinking about what I was going to do in Southern Africa. I'd been working in Botswana and Swaziland and in the region, more generally Zambia and Tanzania. But in 1984, things were happening here. You probably remember that. It first became clear about that time that pressures were building for a change, but I had no idea at that time. So I started looking at a couple of the homelands and how they were being pressured, both Botswana and several of the homelands in the northern area, because I was in Botswana for this period and it was easy to get access. Out of that has come actually a 3-book project, and this is the second of those 3 books. The first book came out, I believe, in about 27, and it focused essentially on the transition at the national level. It's called The State of the State, and then it has a subtitle which I can't remember. This is the second, which looks at governance from the bottom up, focusing particularly on local government institutions and democratic processes. I'm going to just try to set 4 or 5 themes. I'm not going to try to talk specifically about the book, but there are some things that are going on that I think are important to keep in mind. And I'm going to start by committing a little bit of heresy, but also saying I don't quite believe it. The heresy is that a presidential or a national administration is not as important as one might think it was. And you can substitute any name that you wish, but there are issues that revolve around personalities, revolve around symbolic politics, as it's sometimes called, and there are issues that revolve around image. And these image and symbolic politics are important. They make people feel good, or they make people feel not so good. But the concern in these 3 books as a whole are more structural issues, and for that reason all 3 of them take a historical look from these 3 different perspectives as to what has happened within this country for the last 200 or 300 years. There are 4 themes that run throughout all of them, but some are stressed more than others. The negotiations were a political process that are clearly understandable, but they left, as a result of this compromise, not because anybody particularly wanted to do it specifically, but they left an excessively large bureaucracy, particularly at the provincial level, particularly within areas that had 1 or more what used to be called homelands. Now, this means certain areas of the country did not have any homelands, therefore they had perhaps less of a burden. Now, there was some excess because, as you remember, there were quasi-homelands in the 2 areas where there were so-called non-white populations that didn't identify with a non-European language. And so there was a duplication of bureaucracy of sorts here, and a complicated process in a different way in Gauteng, because Gauteng was carved out of a bigger area, but that area had almost no quote-unquote homeland territory. So that's a first theme. Secondly, it's no surprise to say that as the system evolved, both before and after 1994, there was a pattern of patronage and corruption within government, and increasingly through a contracting process, which has its history, but which intensified as more and more former members of government got out of government, started to deliver services on a contracting basis as a result of an understanding of the tendering process, and as a result, in some ways, of relationships within government circles and within, more importantly, I think, administrative bureaucratic circles. Thirdly, and in particular, this is the theme of the book that we're talking about tonight, the system at the local government level was set up destined to create extreme physical stress because of the gap between resources, expectations, and the needs, the terrific needs at local government level. As you take a system that was set up for, let's say, 7,000 people, and it then has to serve, after 1994, let's just make up a figure, 199,000 people. The number of people and the amount of money doesn't change at this level, but the quote-unquote constituency within that unit changes very, very rapidly. There's a fourth pattern, I think, that runs through the last 15 or 20 years, and that is as a result of various historical patterns in terms of values, perhaps ideology, and certainly in terms of identification issues. There remain, I think, within the country, particularly in terms of loyalties to pluralism and what we might call coalition building. These are, I think, about to be tested over, but we've said this before, over the next few years, because there will come a point where coalitions, perhaps in certain provinces first, and then eventually at the national level, are going to be important. The fifth pattern that comes out in this and the other two books is what I would call a weakened center with strong value-based, perhaps some would call them ideologically based movements, performing a major negotiations factor because of a weakened, what I call a weakened liberal center. The liberal movement was not strong here, liberal in the international sense of the word, because it committed itself to a less than liberal solution, going all the way back to the, prior to 1948, all the way back really to the late 19th and early 20th century. And one can see this play out at local level and at national level and in terms of relationships, going all the way back, I would say, at least to the 1830s. So these issues are important. The book that we're talking about tonight primarily focuses on the issue of the community, of local governance, going all the way back to roughly the 18th century, and the way patterns of control met patterns of participation, both in terms of political institutions, political processes, and of course the divided societies within which all of this plays itself out.
The first thing I look at when I review any book is what's new. Okay, what's new? What contribution to knowledge has there been? Now, at least in terms of my view, the authors have passed this test with flying colours. I mean, I do think you made a substantial contribution to knowledge, particularly in terms of traditional leaders and our understanding of rural local government, which is a real gap in history. And although you use a historical approach, this book would be of interest to people in political science, public administration, development studies, and even planning. If you're looking for the big picture, is it going to be a contribution to knowledge? I'd undoubtedly say yes.